Edna Pierce bent down slowly to retrieve a white envelope tucked under her doormat, an HOA citation again. The porch chime let out a soft, uneven tinkle, one of those slightly off-key melodies that only mattered to the person who knew who'd built it. Arthur had hung that chime himself 27 years ago, right after his second knee replacement. If I'm not good for chasing squirrels anymore, he'd said, I'll make something that sings when they show up. Now, long after his voice had faded from the house, the wind carried what was left of it. Edna stood still for a beat, the envelope crinkling lightly in her grasp. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. The HOA had cited her twice this year already, once for a bird feeder too close to the property line, and once for planting mums that extended beyond the authorized floral palette. That one had come with a printed photo stapled to the notice like she was some kind of criminal caught mid-blossom. The mug in her hand, warm and comforting, read World's Best Teacher in faded script. She stepped down onto the leaf-strewn path to her garden, eyes sweeping past the feeder where two sparrows pecked with mild urgency. The shed sat under the sycamore tree quiet, unbothered. Arthur had built it by hand in 1997, one board a week between chemo sessions. It leaned a little now like it too was tired of standing, but it held his tools and smelled faintly of cedar, and that was enough for her. With a sigh, she turned back toward the house and sat on the porch swing, another Arthur relic, its chain giving a familiar creak. The swing tilted slightly to the left, the way it always had since the summer of 2003 when their grandson jumped on it too hard. Edna sipped slowly, trying not to look again at the envelope in her lap. The HOA handbook sat on the side table. She'd pulled it out after the last citation, flipping through its oddly formal language and regulations that seemed to sprout new leaves of their own. Page 18 had a section about non-compliant structures needing pre-approval post-2005, but Arthur's shed predated that. And Edna had minutes from an old HOA meeting that noted its original inclusion. She flipped open the envelope with the edge of a butter knife. Unauthorized structure detected. Parcel 14B. It read, no greeting, no signature, just a QR code and a deadline. Fines would begin at $25 per day. From her porch, she could see the yard across the street. A large trampoline leaned against the fence over there. No citation sticker on that one. And that property, Parcel 12A, belonged to the HOA secretary's niece if memory served. Mr. Curtis wandered up the path, his gait slower than last week. Mornin' Edna, he called, waving his mail satchel like a pendulum. You getting these funny letters too? She smiled faintly. Only when the wind changes direction. He chuckled. Well, don't let it get to you. I've seen him cite a lady once for having patriotic windsocks in July. He tipped his cap and ambled off whistling an old Hank Williams tune. Edna looked back toward the shed. It sat like a memory she hadn't sorted through yet. That summer, Arthur built it. He'd whistled the same tune as Mr. Curtis. He said it helped him hammer straighter. The wind stirred again, scattering more leaves across the porch. She pulled her cardigan tighter, then leaned over to adjust a loose chain on the swing. Her fingers lingered on the worn wood armrest. When did this place stop being home, she whispered. Her eyes caught movement. A dark SUV crept by its windows, tinted its wheels rolling slow, deliberate. On the side, Ashwood Springs Community Watch. No siren, no official plates. Just the HOA's idea of oversight. It idled near the curb, paused, then rolled away. Edna stepped inside and locked the door, the envelope still in her hand. Her gaze lingered on the old shed as the wind began to pick up. Inside the glossy HOA meeting room, Karen Whitaker clicked her pen twice sharp, deliberate as she read the list of non-compliant homes. The conference table gleamed under recessed lights, its lacquered surface reflecting a row of identical water bottles and neatly stacked agendas. At the head where Karen always sat, her monogrammed nameplate gold letters on deep walnut read Karen Whitaker President. Behind her, framed awards for neighborhood excellence lined the wall, interrupted only by landscape photos of Ashwood Springs, a gazebo at sunset, manicured lawns, a playground free of graffiti. The illusion of perfection carefully maintained. Karen adjusted the silk scarf knotted tightly at her neck and tapped her pen against the list once more. At the very top, in clean font Parcel 14B, Edna Pierce. She circled it with slow precision, the ink leaving a bold, decisive ring. Her lips pressed into a tight smile. Let's begin, she said. Her tone clipped, managing to sound cordial and authoritative at once. Charles Levinson cleared his throat gently. He sat 2 chairs down, wearing the same cardigan he always did for meetings, the one with frayed cuffs. His fingers tapped nervously against a closed notebook. Karen, before we go over the citations, perhaps we should well reconsider how we're approaching Mrs. Pierce's shed. She's been a resident longer than most of us. Karen's smile didn't waver. Exactly. And that structure predates the 2005 permit threshold. It was never grandfathered in properly. If we let sentiment override enforcement, then the bylaws mean nothing. She turned to Paige. Rules are rules, Charles. Sentiment is not policy. Across the table, Judy Barrett nodded with mechanical enthusiasm. Hear, hear. We have to maintain the standard. Charles frowned slightly. Still, there's a way to be fair without being punitive. Karen's eyes flicked to him. We are being fair. The same standards apply to everyone. Richard, the Everwatch representative, leaned forward with a salesman's grin. He wore a blazer over a tucked-in polo, his name badge gleaming. Our team can handle this with discretion. We've got templates for letters, staged visits, even mediation scripts if it comes to that. No need to get your hands dirty. Karen tilted her head. We're not getting dirty. We're maintaining shine. Richard chuckled awkwardly. Of course. She lifted the compliance escalation notice from her folder and signed it with a graceful flick of her pen. The ink flowed smoothly, her signature large and unwavering. She paused, then added the date beneath it in tidy numerals. Let's remind them who protects this place. As the others busied themselves with their papers, Karen's gaze drifted toward the far corner of the room. A small table held her half-empty thermos, a trace of steam still rising from the spout. The faint scent of herbal tea mingled with lemon-scented cleaner. Next to it stood a silver picture frame slightly tilted containing a photo of a younger woman in a graduation gown, smiling arm hooked around Karen's both women dressed in matching navy blue. She looked at the picture for a moment longer than she intended. Outside, the shadows lengthened across the clubhouse lawn. The last of the autumn light painted the trees in bronze, but inside, the air held steady at a chilly 69 degrees, crisp, sterile controlled. The meeting adjourned with nods and murmurs. Charles gathered his things, slowly casting a glance at Karen before leaving. Judy lingered, complimenting Karen on her scarf, and then bustled out. Richard offered a firm handshake, reminding her Everwatch would send confirmation by week's end. Alone again, Karen sat back and traced the edge of the photo frame with a manicured nail. Her smile returned tighter now, hollow around the edges. Karen didn't move for a while after the door clicked shut. The silence in the room pressed in, more noticeable now that the buzz of voices had faded. Her eyes lingered on the list of properties, dozens of names, yet only one truly irritated her equilibrium. Edna Pierce. Always with her hedges just slightly too wild, her shed just slightly too weathered, her demeanor just slightly too unbothered. She remembered the first time she saw that shed 15 years ago when she had moved in after the divorce. She was still raw then, new to singlehood, and trying to repaint the contours of her identity. The shed had been painted sunflower yellow back then, and she had thought it garish, unkempt. A stubborn monument to something old and immovable. Karen pressed her fingers to her temples. The scarf around her neck felt tighter than before. Meanwhile, outside in the fading light, Charles paused on the concrete walkway. The clubhouse door swung shut behind him with a soft thud. He stood still, eyes unfocused, while the wind stirred the fallen leaves around his shoes. He thought about Edna, how she used to bring pound cake to community events, how she'd tutored his niece in math after school. He didn't like confrontation. But more than that, he disliked what the HOA was becoming. Maybe he'd speak up again. Or maybe not. Back inside, Karen stood and poured the remaining tea into the sink. The herbal steam rose one last time, curling into nothing. She rinsed the cup, dried it with a paper towel, and set it beside the frame photo, adjusting the angle as if that could fix everything else that was tilted. A sparkle. That was what the neighborhood needed. Fewer cracks, fewer exceptions, fewer memories. This neighborhood used to sparkle. I'll make it shine again even if I have to bleach it clean. Edna stood quietly in the shed, her hands brushing across the old bench where her husband once sanded driftwood on Sunday afternoons. The late day sun filtered through the small, grimy window dust, floating like soft embers in the golden light. A faint scent of pine and time-worn varnish clung to the wooden walls. Every corner of the shed whispered with memory. She ran her fingers along the edges of an old toolbox still labeled Frank's, hands off in smudged permanent marker. Beside it, a coffee can of rusty nails and mismatched screws sat exactly where he'd left it. On the wall, curled at the corners but lovingly preserved under yellowed tape, was a photograph of Edna and a boy of 7 miles dressed in an oversized judge's robe and holding a plastic gavel, both grinning with pumpkin-shaped candy buckets in hand. The photo made her heart twist gently. She remembered that Halloween clearly. Miles had insisted on being a judge like Daddy wanted to be before he taught shop instead. Frank had laughed so hard he nearly cried. Outside, a breeze rustled the maple leaves, sending shadows dancing across the shed's floorboards. Edna took a deep breath and reached into an old cabinet. She pulled out a crocheted blanket, its stitches slightly uneven from when she first taught herself the pattern during long hospital visits. Tucked beneath it, a stack of church newsletters, each one bearing her scribbled margin notes for the senior fellowship potluck. A knock sounded from the backyard gate light, familiar. Edna. You decent, I brought muffins. Edna smiled. Back here, Mabel. Mrs. Kessler stepped into the yard wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and carrying a small basket. Her face bore the creases of a life fully lived, and her laugh lines made her look permanently amused. Made too many pecan muffins again. George says they're hazardous to his sugar. Then lucky for me, Edna replied, setting the basket on the windowsill where a pecan pie was cooling. Mrs. Kessler's eyes swept over the interior of the shed. Still got Frank's things, huh, some? Edna said softly. It's peaceful here, like he's still around. They stood in companionable silence before Mrs. Kessler's expression turned more serious. You hear about what Everwatch did to the Wilks down on Maple Lane? Edna frowned. No. Repainted their porch without asking. Said it violated code. Gave him a bill and a warning. Bill came first. Edna's grip on the photo frame tightened. These HOA folks, Mrs. Kessler shook her head. They don't care what this place used to be, just what it looks like now. Be careful, Edna. As dusk crept in, Edna returned to the house with the muffins her joints aching with the day's chill. She folded the crocheted blanket over the couch, adjusted a lamp so the soft light glowed warmly against the wood-paneled walls, and switched on the old radio. Faint strings from a 1960s ballad trickled through the room. On the coffee table lay a second envelope, this one not tucked but shoved under the door. Her breath hitched as she opened it. Notice of eviction. Action scheduled. Failure to comply may result in fees removal of property and temporary suspension of community privileges. Her fingers trembled. The print blurred slightly. She set the envelope down carefully, walked to the phone mounted on the kitchen wall, and dialed. After 2 rings, a deep, familiar voice answered. Hey, Mom. Hi, honey, she said, forcing calm. Did I catch you at a bad time? Never. Everything okay? She hesitated. I got another notice. The line was quiet for a moment. Then gently, from them she nodded, forgetting he couldn't see her. They said they're sending someone. For the shed. His voice steadied. It's just a shed, Mom. It's not, she whispered. It's him. That bench, that window. It's where we were still us. A pause. I'll come home, Miles said. Edna closed her eyes, tears finally falling. You don't have to. I want to. He interrupted softly but firmly. You're not going to face this alone. After the call, she stood on the porch and looked out at the yard. The porch light flickered on, casting a circle of warmth across the worn steps. She and Frank had installed it together in '98, arguing over wiring, laughing through mistakes. Now, she stood alone, watching the shadows stretch long across the lawn. The wind had died down. Even the trees were still. Then came the sound, a soft chime like the porch bell catching a breeze. But there was no breeze. A figure passed beyond the hedges, too quick to see clearly. Just a shape swallowed by dusk. Edna froze. The chime rattled again. She stepped inside and turned the deadbolt, her fingers brushing the envelope on the table. The radio played on a ballad about lost time. Outside, something waited. She turned off the radio and sat with her hands folded in her lap, listening to the silence fill every crevice of the house. Outside, the last traces of daylight slipped behind the trees, painting the sky with streaks of ash and rose. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked once, then fell quiet. She reached for the ceramic mug on the table, still warm, and held it close as though it could anchor her to something steady. A black town car pulled up to Edna's house just after sunset. The man who stepped out moved slowly, but his presence settled like certainty. The porch chime stirred again. Miles paused beneath it, remembering the sound from years before. The wind hadn't touched it, and yet it sang just like it did when he was 10 and trying to sneak out to the woods behind the garden, and the chime betrayed him with a single clang. Edna was already at the door. She didn't smile, didn't speak right away. She just looked at him with those soft, wondering eyes that had seen too many seasons alone. You look tired, she said finally. I drove straight from Raleigh. You could have called earlier. I didn't want to worry you twice. She moved aside, letting him in. The living room still smelled faintly of cinnamon and old pages. A crochet blanket lay folded over the couch arm, and the ceramic, world's best teacher mug sat empty by the window. Outside, the maples flickered in silhouette, their crimson leaves like drops of wine scattered in the dusk. They didn't speak much for a while. Miles stepped out back into the yard where the shed sat like a patient witness. His shoes made soft indentations in the grass, still damp from morning dew. He circled the structure slowly, noting the age of the wood, the small brass plaque above the door. Built with love. 1997. His father's handiwork still held. A craftsman's pride preserved in cedar and nails. From the corner of his eye, he saw the Everwatch SUV again. Same slow crawl headlights dimmed. No confrontation, just presence. That was always the point. After checking the rear gate's latch and scanning the neighboring fences, Miles headed down to the corner of the block. A small coffee shop. The Hickory Cup sat tucked behind a pair of stone planters. It was quiet, half-lit, a few locals sipping in silence. He ordered a decaf black and waited. The waitress, mid-40s, curly blonde hair, reading glasses pushed to the top of her head, paused when she saw his name on the card. Pierce. She asked, voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. She didn't say more, just gave a slight nod and handed him the coffee. As he sipped, his eyes drifted to the corkboard by the register flyers for lost cats, babysitting offers, and one stark HOA bulletin, maintain neighborhood aesthetic, report all violations via app. Back at the house, Edna had lit a candle on the dining table. Pot roast was cooling beneath foil, and the smell filled the room like a warm coat. She unfolded napkins from a drawer, old linen ones with faded stitching, the same kind she used when company came by in the 80s. They sat across from each other. No phones at the table, no interruptions. Miles noted how she cut her meat slower now, how her fingers trembled ever so slightly near the knife. Mrs. Kessler brought over some sweet tea earlier, she said softly. Said the Everwatch folks parked by her hydrant last night. They didn't move even when she walked her dog. They're not just for show, Miles said. They're building patterns, presence, intimidation routine. He glanced out the window. I've seen this before. Edna looked at him, puzzled. Where? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stood up and retrieved his laptop from the black leather case by the couch. He moved deliberately, a man unpacking something heavier than electronics. After a few minutes of silence, the screen glowed and Miles began scrolling. He found it in the second set of files. HOA meeting minutes dated just 2 weeks earlier. The language was coded, but to him, unmistakable. Community enforcement partnerships in cooperation with third-party observational providers shall assist in compliance transitions. That's illegal in 2 counties, he muttered. What is... He turned the screen toward her. They're using private security for enforcement unlicensed, no oversight. And they're masking it in board minutes to look like landscaping contracts. And his face tightened. You can prove it. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. I can get DOJ attention, quietly. But that buys time, not immunity. She nodded slowly. The pot roast had gone cold. Neither of them noticed. In the corner, the news played softly. Concerns continue over homeowner associations exceeding their authority, particularly in southern states, before fading into a weather report. Miles stood again, restless. He walked to the window and peered out. The street was empty now. The shadows had lengthened into dark smears along the pavement. He said quietly to Edna, if they act tomorrow, they won't be ready for what follows. At exactly 9:01 a.m. on Monday, 3 men in black vests stood at Edna's porch, clipboard and hand expressions unreadable. The same black SUV from Chapter 1 was parked at the end of the cul-de-sac nose, angled toward the house like a watchful predator. The neighborhood, bathed in the sleepy gold of a South Carolina morning, gave no hint that something was about to unfold. Birds chirped softly. A lawnmower hummed somewhere 2 streets over. But at Edna's doorstep, the air held its breath. She opened the door slowly, chin held high. The man in the center stepped forward. Ma'am, we're here on behalf of the Ashwood Springs Homeowners Association. You've been cited multiple times for non-compliance. We're here to begin compliance action. His voice was smooth practiced. Too smooth. His black vest bore the Everwatch insignia white letters in clean military font. No badge, no county seal. Edna didn't answer. She only looked back over her shoulder where Miles was already approaching from the hallway, tie not yet tightened, but presence unmistakable. He stepped past her onto the porch into the morning sun. I'm going to need to see your legal authorization, he said, voice steady, tone low. The man Dalton, according to the name stitched on his vest, lifted the clipboard. We have a mandate from the HOA board signed by President Whitaker. It authorizes community enforcement. Miles didn't even glance at the paper. That's not a legal document. That's a memo. Dalton hesitated, the clipboard wavering. Where's your warrant? Miles asked again, slower this time. Or did you forget that private organizations can't execute property enforcement without judicial authority? The second man shifted his weight. The third looked to Dalton. Silence stretched. Edna, silent until now, reached down to brush 2 leaves off the railing of her porch. A simple gesture, unhurried, composed. She adjusted the collar of her blouse, then met Dalton's eyes. This house has stood since 1962. I've paid every tax, planted every bush, and swept every square foot of this porch with these hands. Dalton's mouth opened, then closed. Miles stepped forward. You are in violation of South Carolina Code, FAR 27 to 3130, Title 18 of the U.S. Code regarding private action on residential property, and you're bordering on trespass under federal statutes involving senior citizens. He took a card from his breast pocket, handed it gently across. Miles J. Pierce, U.S. Supreme Court. Dalton blinked. The card didn't shake in Miles's fingers, but it quivered in Dalton's. Inside HOA headquarters across town, a screen blinked in the dim light of a sealed office. Karen Whitaker leaned in close to the live stream feed, lips pursed. The Everwatch team's mic was live. She could hear every word. As Miles handed over his card, her eyes widened. Her hand reached for the mug beside her, but missed. The ceramic hit tile and shattered. The chat window next to the video exploded. Judy Barrett. Who is that, Board Admin Levinson? This is bad, I'm logging off. Karen WHOA. Stay calm, Richard O. Watch. We were not informed of DOJ affiliation system. Charles Levinson has left the chat. Back on the porch, Dalton was breathing harder now. His hand moved toward a walkie clipped at his hip, then stopped short. Miles didn't move. He didn't need to. You have 5 minutes to leave. After that, you'll be talking to the Attorney General's office. The HOA clubhouse hadn't been this full in over a decade, and this time no one came for free donuts. Folding chairs scraped the linoleum floor as neighbors filed in, murmuring and clutching paper cups of lukewarm lemonade. The overhead lights flickered with a tired hum, casting pale halos over the gathering. Some came in pressed khakis and cardigans, others in gardening boots and windbreakers, but all carried the same quiet resolve in their eyes. Near the back of the room, Charles Levinson stood near the door, a thick manila envelope clutched to his chest. He wasn't speaking, just watching. Waiting. The expression on his face was unreadable, but his grip on the folder was firm. At the head of the room, Karen Whitaker adjusted the microphone and offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Welcome, everyone, she began, voice smooth as lacquered wood. I'm so pleased to see such civic engagement. It's a testament to how much we all care about keeping Ashwood Springs beautiful and orderly. A few polite nods. No applause. She launched into her report landscaping updates, a reminder about Halloween decorations, and a familiar line about protecting community standards. But there was tension in the room, a static in the air that even her carefully chosen words couldn't smooth away. Charles stepped forward, clearing his throat into a second mic. I'd like to share an addendum to the financial disclosures, he said, unfolding the contents of his envelope with quiet gravity. He held up a single-page printout, his voice louder than expected. The HOA board authorized payments totaling $18,950 this quarter to Everwatch Community Enforcement, a private security firm without full member approval and without itemized invoices. The room rustled. Gasps. Someone whispered, "That explains the SUV." Karen stiffened. Before she could interject, Miles rose from a seat in the middle row wearing a navy blazer and expression of calm certainty. He walked to the front with slow, deliberate steps and set a stack of printed documents on the podium. I'm here as a guest, he said, but I'd like to present evidence of multiple charter violations by this HOA board. Starting with Article 3, Section 4 concerning misuse of discretionary funds and continuing through Section 9 where unilateral enforcement partnerships are explicitly prohibited without full neighborhood consent. He paused. I've also submitted these findings to the South Carolina Attorney General's office. A wave of silence spread like ripples on still water. Then Mrs. Kessler stood up, a crocheted shawl slipping off one shoulder. They fined me $200 for a bird bath, she said, voice shaking. Said it attracted pests. That bird bath's been there 20 years. Mr. Harlan rose next. Vietnam veteran still carried his bearing in his spine. He pulled a folded letter from his pocket. This is from the HOA. Told me my front yard flagpole violated height restrictions. He unfolded the paper slowly. Said it was visually aggressive. My son gave me that flag before he shipped out. A soft murmur ran through the room. No one interrupted. The Mills couple took the floor after that, sharing how Everwatch agents peered through their blinds during dinner. And one by one, others followed. Names, dates, warnings, citations, all painting a pattern. Not of order, but of intimidation. Karen tried to interject once then, twice. But her voice no longer held weight. The room had shifted. The tide had turned. Charles cleared his throat again. I move that we open a vote to dissolve the current HOA board effective immediately. Hands went up across the room like rising wheat. All in favor, rows of hands. Elderly, young black, white calloused, polished, united. Only 3 hands stayed down. The final tally, 93% in favor. Karen's mouth opened, closed. She looked toward Judy Barrett, seated at the front like always. But Judy didn't meet her gaze. Without a word, Karen turned, stepping off the platform. Her heels clicked against the tile as she exited through the side door. No one stopped her, not even Judy. Karen sat alone in her SUV, the engine running but unmoving as her HOA badge lay upside down on the passenger seat. The badge, once polished and proudly worn at every meeting, now reflected a dull sliver of morning sun through the windshield. Its plastic edge had cracked slightly, a tiny fracture she hadn't noticed before. Outside the Ashwood Springs signpost stood just ahead, surrounded by trimmed hedges she once inspected personally every Thursday. Her manicured nails, chipped at the edges, tapped nervously on the steering wheel, its faux leather worn and fraying where her thumbs always rested. She opened the HOA mobile app. The login screen greeted her with sterile blue, but each attempt to enter her password returned the same message, access denied. She closed it, tried again, still denied. Her phone vibrated. Voicemail. One new message. She tapped it. Judy's name never appeared. Just silence. She dialed again and again. It went to voicemail. Then straight to disconnected. She glanced at the passenger seat. Beside the overturned badge sat a half-empty cup of herbal tea, long gone cold from a drive-thru she'd barely remembered visiting. The scent of lavender had faded, overtaken by something bitter. Outside, Charles Levinson stood at a polite distance under a lamppost. He wasn't watching her, just waiting for someone. He held nothing. He needed nothing from her anymore. Karen leaned back in her seat. The porch chime echoed in her memory, delicate and precise. But not Edna's. Not now. This one belonged to another house decades ago. Her childhood porch in Savannah before the divorce, before the endless pursuit of order. Her mother had loved wind chimes. Karen used to hate their unpredictability. Even then, she preferred the sharpness of things that clicked into place. Her thumb hovered over Miles Pierce's number. She tapped it. It rang twice. A voice calm and wavering answered. You reached Miles J. Pierce. I'm unavailable at the moment. If this concerns Ashwood Springs, please contact the acting HOA mediator. Beep. She said nothing. Just held the phone near her lips, then ended the call. A knock on the window startled her. Sheriff Mallory, in tan uniform and wraparound sunglasses, nodded through the glass. His hand rested casually on his belt. Karen lowered the window halfway. Ma'am, he said evenly, it's time. She didn't argue. Just reached behind the passenger seat and retrieved the small blue plastic archive box. Inside, Records keys, community blueprints, and a laminated map of zoning codes she once insisted be displayed in every mailbox. She handed it to him without a word, then paused. From the center console, she took one last item, the silver key to the HOA clubhouse. Mallory accepted both. "Thank you," he said. "This part's done." He walked away. The sun had risen higher now, spilling across the freshly swept cul-de-sac. Karen stepped out of the SUV, her pumps pressing lightly into the sidewalk cracks. Her cardigan slipped from one shoulder. She didn't bother fixing it. At the signpost, she knelt. The engraved nameplate, Karen Whitaker, HOA President 2014 to 2025, was bolted to the brick base. She unscrewed the tiny fasteners with stiff fingers. The plaque came off easily. She stood holding it trembling. Not from cold, just emptiness. A soft ping came from her phone. Voicemail. She played it. Miles's voice was calm, detached. "This place deserves to be cared for, not ruled. It was never about you, Miss Whitaker. It was about everyone you forgot." She closed the message. No tears, just silence. As she turned to leave, footsteps approached from the east path, residents walking together in light jackets and quiet conversation. Mrs. Kessler passed first, arms linked with Mr. Harlan. Karen's eyes met hers for a brief second. Mrs. Kessler nodded, neither kind nor cruel. The others passed without a word. Not one paused. Not one looked back. The first frost of November sparkled across Edna's backyard, but the old shed stood tall, repainted a soft sage green. The color caught the morning light in a way that felt almost intentional, like the shed had been waiting for this exact hue all along. Its boards, once worn to a silvery gray, now bore a fresh coat that matched the gentle spirit of its owner. Underneath the maple tree, the grass still crunched underfoot, but the cold didn't keep the neighbors away. The lawn at Ashwood Springs shimmered under the rising sun, dotted with folding tables bearing mismatched tablecloths. Ceramic mugs steamed with coffee and paper plates sagged under biscuits, casseroles, and Mrs. Kessler's famous sweet potato pie. A Bluetooth speaker near the garden played soft piano covers of old Motown hits. Children knelt on the sidewalk with fat sticks of chalk, their little fingers stained blue and yellow, drawing suns with smiling faces and hearts surrounded by flowers. Harlan, in his veteran's ball cap, laughed softly as he guided one of the boys in, drawing a flag. A woman hummed near the food table, stirring sugar into a shared pitcher of iced tea despite the chill. Miles stood at the porch steps, sleeves rolled to his elbows, carefully adjusting the swing. The rope had frayed slightly with time, and one of the hooks needed tightening. His motions were slow, deliberate, not just mechanical, but reverent. From the kitchen window, Edna watched him for a long moment before stepping out with a dish of warm biscuits wrapped in a cloth napkin from the 70s. The print, tiny green apples on faded muslin matched her apron. She paused on the threshold, letting the sound of the porch chime settle over her. The wind lifted it gently, a soft chorus of bells swaying in the crisp air. "Need a hand?" she asked, her voice carrying down to him. Miles looked up, grinned. Always. They worked side by side without speaking much. The swing seat had been sanded and varnished the night before, and Miles guided it carefully back into place. When it finally hung true, he tested it with his weight and gave it a gentle push. It creaked once, then swayed smooth. "Looks right," he said. "Feels right," Edna replied. On the other side of the lawn, Charles approached slowly, a folded newspaper tucked under one arm. He wore a plaid scarf that clashed cheerfully with his jacket. When Edna met his eyes, he tipped his head. "You started something here," he said softly. "No," she corrected. "We remembered something." He chuckled and handed her the newspaper. The headline read, "In bold, Ashwood Springs HOA votes for reform. Residents lead the way." A photo beneath showed the clubhouse lit from within, packed with residents' mid-vote faces, alight with something more than decision freedom. "Rotating leadership," Charles said, gesturing toward the green. 2-year terms, open minutes, public access records, and no more private enforcement contracts. Edna raised an eyebrow. None, he confirmed. Miles made sure of that. With extreme clarity. They both laughed. Just then, the familiar mail truck rumbled down the lane. Mr. Curtis waved from the driver's seat, then stopped at Edna's box and slid something in. Edna excused herself, walking down the path bordered with chrysanthemums now closing for winter. Inside the box, tucked between catalogs and a church bulletin, was a single envelope. Her name was written in loopy, uncertain cursive. She turned it over. No return address. Back under the maple tree, Edna sat on the bench beside the swing and opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a letter faintly creased. The first lines read, "Dear Mrs. Pierce. You probably don't remember me. It's been decades. I was in your 3rd grade class the year my dad got sick." Edna's eyes lingered on the words. Each line unfolded a memory she hadn't known someone else had carried all these years. Mentions of patience, of gentle encouragement, of how one afternoon reading Charlotte's Web had changed the way a child saw the world. "You made me feel safe when I didn't know what safe was. I think you saved me in a quiet way. Thank you." She folded the letter slowly. Her hand brushed against the envelope and she smiled soft, quiet fall. The porch chime rang again. She stood letter in hand and walked toward the shed. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and old wood. The bench had been cleaned, its corners free of dust. She placed the letter in a small wooden frame and hung it gently on the inside wall, just above a photo of her and a boy in a judge's Halloween costume. Sometimes standing still is the bravest move. Edna smiles and hangs the note inside the shed. On a quiet morning in Ashwood Springs, the shed stood freshly painted, and laughter once again echoed where silence had lingered too long. What began as one woman's quiet resistance became a spark that lit the hearts of her neighbors, reminding them that rules should protect, not oppress. When power forgets its purpose, it takes just one steady voice and a community willing to listen to set things right. Like autumn leaves swept gently into a shared garden bed, healing grows best when it's done together.